The morning was quieter than most. The kind of quiet that doesn't simply mean the absence of sound, but the presence of something waiting. Elijah Eli Whitmore stirred in bed before the alarm could do its job. Not that he needed it. He hadn't needed an alarm clock in over 40 years. His body had long since surrendered to the clockwork rhythm forged in the barracks and battlefields of another life. He rose with the same deliberate grace, as always methodical, unwavering, as though each motion mattered. The floor beneath his feet groaned not just from age, but from memory. Every timber of the cabin whispered stories he never told. Mississippi's early autumn air crept through the thin seams of the old wooden house, cool and damp like breath on the back of the neck. He slipped on his flannel shirt, creased and worn in all the right places, and made his way barefoot into the kitchen. The kettle was already on the stove, a ritual as predictable as sunrise. Eli didn't drink coffee much anymore. The bitterness had grown too sharp in recent years, too acidic for his stomach. Still, he made it every morning out of habit, out of loyalty perhaps to a younger version of himself who had once needed it to stay alert, to stay alive. He reached for the mug with a chipped handle and stood silently as the steam rose. Out on the porch, the swing creaked under his weight, each grown a small defiance against time. Eli sipped slowly, his eyes tracing the tree line beyond the dirt road. The leaves were just beginning to change, tinged with rust and gold, a reminder that even nature had its way of letting go. His skin itched, nothing serious, just a dull irritation between his shoulder blades. He reached back absent-mindedly and scratched, not thinking much of it. But later that day, while hauling a few logs toward the back of the property, the itch returned. Sharper this time. Insistent. That evening in the bathroom mirror, he twisted to get a better look. Using a small handheld mirror, he managed to catch sight of a faint discoloration near his left shoulder blade. A blotch no bigger than a silver dollar. It looked like a bruise, except it wasn't tender. Just oddly firm. The skin seemed thicker somehow. He pressed it gently. No pain. Just strange. He didn't mention it to Ava when she called that Sunday. She asked about his blood pressure, about whether he was eating enough. The usual litany. He gave the usual answers. Still breathing, he muttered. That was enough for her, for now. The house had become more than a home. It was a bunker of sorts. A shrine. Every item had its place. Every corner held its own quiet contract with the past. The bookshelf was lined with war memoirs, dog-eared volumes of Hemingway Faulkner, and worn military field guides. A dusty leather satchel sat in the far corner of the closet, untouched for years. Above the fireplace, a black-and-white photo stared back at him. 7 men, mud-caked and wild-eyed, standing knee-deep in a jungle that no longer existed. Eli stood on the far right, 1 foot forward, his mouth curled into a smirk that wasn't quite a smile. The man beside him, Noah Delaney, had slung an arm around his shoulder. Noah had died in '69. No warning, no goodbye, just silence. Beneath the photo hung a folded American flag in a wooden display case, the corners perfectly triangular, the glass smudged with the soft prints of Eli's fingers. He cleaned it every week, whether it needed it or not. That night before bed, he ran his fingers along the discolored patch again. It felt warmer now, maybe inflamed. He didn't own a thermometer. Didn't trust most of modern medicine either, not after the things he'd seen. Instead, he pulled out an old tin of balm, expired years ago, and rubbed it in the menthol, burning slightly but not deep enough to reach the strange root of it. Weeks passed. The patch thickened. Another lump appeared near his ribs, then another. Eli didn't panic. He didn't Google symptoms. He didn't drive into town to see a doctor. He watched. He waited. He measured with fingers and instinct. The lumps didn't hurt. That, he told himself, was reason enough to keep quiet. Some nights he'd sit on the porch swing longer than usual, shirt off, letting the cool air soothe the rising warmth beneath his skin. The stars blinked above him, disinterested, the same ones he had looked at from jungle outposts half a world away. Once, as he sat there, he thought he heard it again, the sound. A soft hum. Insects, maybe. Or not. He took another sip of tea. Ignored it. Inside the bathroom mirror, the lumps multiplied. now 5 ranging in size. They looked like submerged stones beneath his skin, smooth, fixed, waiting. His body, once strong, once a fortress, had become foreign, unpredictable. But Eli never flinched. Pain was a private thing. And so he endured. If this story is beginning to stir something within you, stay with us. Subscribe now and don't miss what comes next, because sometimes the quietest beginnings lead to the loudest truths. The gravel whispered beneath the tires of Ava Whitmore's compact car as it wound its way up the familiar path toward the cabin. The sun had only just begun its climb, casting long amber shadows between the pine trees. Morning dew still clung to the grass like memory. She hadn't planned to visit, not this weekend, not so soon. But something in her father's voice on the last call, something behind the "I'm fine," had cracked the usual armor. It was a silence that spoke louder than any words he ever dared to say. Eli was already on the porch swing as though he'd been waiting. His flannel shirt hung loose over his frame collar, buttoned high, mug in hand. He didn't wave, just nodded. Ava stepped out of the car and stood for a moment, one hand shading her eyes. She breathed in the earthy scent of pine and firewood. It smelled like childhood. Like Sundays spent chasing sunlight through the woods. Like her mother's voice calling them in for supper. But the man in front of her was older than memory. Thinner, somehow. And his shoulders, once broad like barn beams, seemed to have folded slightly inward. She climbed the steps, each creak of the wood marking time between them. "You're up early," she said gently. "I'm always up early." She sat beside him. The swing shifted with her weight, the old rhythm settling around them. They didn't speak for a while. Silence for them was never awkward. It was a kind of inherited language. Then she looked at him more closely. "You look pale," she said, keeping her voice even, "and thinner." He shrugged. "The scale says the same." "Do you eat?" "When I feel like it." She didn't push, not yet. Instead, she reached for the hand mirror from her bag, held it in her lap like a quiet offering. "I need to see it," she said, her tone no longer soft. He didn't look at her, just kept sipping his tea. Dad. Still nothing. Ava stood, walked inside the house, and returned moments later with a determination he couldn't ignore. She placed the mirror in his hands. "I'm not asking. I'm your daughter. I need to see." Eli sighed. A long, tired breath from the well of a man who had carried too much for too long. Then, wordlessly, he set the mug down, stood, and unbuttoned his shirt. What she saw took her breath. Across his back and sides the lumps had multiplied 8, at least, maybe more, varying in size and color, some bruised purple, others yellowed like fading bruises. One near his rib cage looked cracked as if the skin was beginning to split. A black vein thin as a thread spidered outward from its center. "Oh my God," she whispered. He turned slightly, his voice low. "I told you not to worry." She stepped around him, studying the masses. Her fingers hovered over one, then made contact. The lump was warm, too warm, and hard, like stone beneath flesh. "I called Dr. Bell," she said quietly. "He made room for you tomorrow, 9 a.m. "I'm not going." She stepped back. "Why not?" "Because I already know what they'll say." Her eyes narrowed. "I've seen it before," he added. "Friends of mine, same kind of growths, same kind of waiting rooms. They poke, they prod, they say it's too late, they send you home with a bottle of pills and a stack of bills." Ava's voice trembled. "You don't know that." "I do," he said, his voice hardening. "Noah Delaney, patrol buddy, long and 69. Same symptoms, same end. So you'll just let it kill you. I've made peace with it. Well, I haven't." Silence again. Heavy, unforgiving. She took a step forward. "Mom would have made you go." His shoulders stiffened. "She'd have dragged you there herself if she had to." He didn't speak for a long time. Then, almost inaudibly, "I didn't tell her about the numbness in my leg. Not until after she got diagnosed." Ava blinked. "You mean you had symptoms even back then?" He nodded once. "Didn't want to steal her time." Her voice cracked. "You're not stealing mine. You are my time." Eli looked at her fully now. His face was tired not just from the illness but from decades of silence. "I'm scared," he said, "not of dying, but of what they'll do to me, what they'll find, what they'll turn me into." Ava stepped closer, placed her hand gently on his chest. "Then let's face it together." His eyes searched hers, for permission, for strength, for something he wasn't even sure he deserved. Finally he nodded. "I'll go." That night the cabin was quiet, but the silence had softened. It no longer pressed against the walls like a threat. Ava cooked a simple meal soup bread, nothing fancy. Eli ate more than usual. Later, while she slept in the guest room, he sat on the porch, the swing creaking beneath him, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. He held the old mug in both hands, now filled with warm honey water instead of tea. The stars above shimmered coldly. The woods stood still, and the ache beneath his skin pulsed with something ancient. But for the first time in years, he wasn't carrying it alone. Sometimes all it takes is one voice to break generations of silence. If this story resonates with you, subscribe. Let's walk through the quiet together. The waiting room of the VA Medical Center buzzed faintly under fluorescent lights. A low hum, half-mechanical, half-human pages, turning footsteps echoing the quiet cough of aging lungs. But none of it reached Eli. He sat rigidly in the corner, hands folded over his stomach, eyes fixed on the floor tiles like they were landmines. Across from him, Ava flicked through a magazine without reading a word, her knee bouncing with barely contained anxiety. It wasn't fear that held Eli hostage, it was memory, thick and uninvited, and it began, as it always did, with the heat. That jungle heat, heavy, oily, the kind that didn't just sit on the skin but poured into the lungs like smoke. It was 1969. He was 23 and too young to feel as old as he did. The jungle in Long An was alive with sound buzzing, clicking, the warbling of unseen things. Sweat ran down his back beneath the canvas of his uniform. The M16 strap had rubbed a raw line across his shoulder. Noah Delaney walked ahead, his frame lean and quick, always a few steps faster. Behind them, 5 other men trudged silently, boots sinking into mud that refused to let go. They'd been out for 3 days. The trees arched high overhead, thick with humidity leaves like wax. There was a smell, not rot, not fresh, just wet. The kind of scent that clung to your soul. Then it came. A sound slow and low. Not mechanical like the Hueys. It was something else. A soft hiss like breath through metal teeth. Eli looked up. A C-123 aircraft sliced across the sky, trailing something behind it. At first it looked like mist, silver and fine, drifting lazily down through the canopy. It caught the light, almost beautiful in its descent. "What the hell is that?" someone muttered behind him. Fogger, another guest. Noah squinted, frowning. "Doesn't smell like bug spray." And it didn't. It didn't smell like anything. That was the problem. Within minutes the leaves began to change. The vibrant greens dulled, curling inward. A slick residue coated everything, the trees, their weapons, their skin. Eli wiped his arm. The liquid left a cold streak where it touched. Too cold for the jungle. "Move out," the sergeant barked. "Stay low." But the forest was already changing. The birds had stopped. Even the insects, relentless until now, had fallen silent. That night they camped by a river. Eli scrubbed his arms raw. The residue clung to him, clinging like regret. No matter how hard he scrubbed, he could still feel it inside his pores, beneath the skin, in his breath. The next morning they came upon a village. Small, maybe a dozen huts. Bamboo and tin nestled near a stream. Children darted between chickens. Women pounded rice in baskets. Life moved slowly here, unaware of the war sneaking up behind it. The villagers froze when the soldiers appeared. One elder stepped forward, hands raised not in fear but in greeting. Eli lowered his weapon first. They weren't enemies, just people. He crouched down and offered a hard candy to a little boy, maybe 7 years old, wide eyes, barefoot, covered in dust and curiosity. "Shin, come on," the boy whispered. Eli smiled. "No problem, buddy." He helped the boy unwrap the candy, showed him how to hold it on his tongue. A soft moment absurd in its gentleness, suspended in a war that rarely allowed such things. Then they moved on. 3 days later they passed through the same area. The village was gone, not burned, not bombed, just gone. The huts were still standing, but silent. The chickens were dead, scattered across the dirt like broken toys. A dog lay twitching under a tree foam at its mouth, and the boy. He was curled beside the center hut as if asleep. Eli dropped to his knees. The boy's skin was pale. His lips were cracked. No blood, no wounds, just stillness. A black residue stained the corners of his mouth. Behind him, Noah whispered, "Jesus." Another soldier vomited behind a tree. Eli didn't move. He didn't cry. He just sat there staring at the boy's face, remembering the candy and the smile, and how quiet the jungle had been that day. When they radioed command, the reply was flat. "Do not engage, area neutralized." Neutralized? What had they neutralized? There had been no battle, no enemy fire, just silence. Chemical silence. Later, back at base, Eli tried to ask questions. What was in that spray? Shrugs. Is it dangerous? Silence. Should we report the village? More silence. One night he sat by the river again, scrubbing his arms until they bled. It didn't help. He still felt it inside him. Alive. Weeks passed. A rash bloomed across one man's chest. Another began bleeding from the nose. Noah collapsed on patrol, convulsing, foaming, gone in seconds. Heat stroke, they said. Maybe a seizure. But Eli knew better. When he came home in 71, his reports disappeared into the VA's filing cabinets, swallowed by bureaucracy. No one followed up. No one returned his calls. Eventually, he stopped asking, stopped trying, but the dreams remained. Sometimes the boy would appear still holding the candy. Other times he'd just stare, eyes open, unblinking, accusing. "You could have saved me." Eli built the cabin with his own hands, wood stone insulation. But no wall could keep the jungle out. It lived under his skin. It watched him through the trees. It breathed in the silence between his breaths. And now, sitting in the hospital waiting for tests he didn't want to understand, Eli could feel it again. The cold. The hush. The hiss. He clenched his hands to stop the shaking. But his skin pulsed. The itch burned. And deep beneath the flesh, something moved. Not a memory. Not anymore. The light in the ICU room shifted with the hour, never full, never dark. It filtered through blinds like breath, coloring the white walls in tired shades of gray. Machines beeped steadily like a clock that counted more than time. Ava sat beside her father, the old leather notebook open in her lap. The pages were delicate with age. The ink had faded in some places, smudged in others, but the words were alive. They pulsed. They whispered. Each letter bore a date, a salutation, a breath caught in ink. Some addressed her mother, some had no name at all, and others surprisingly were for her. She had no memory of him writing them. She turned the pages slowly, as if they might disintegrate beneath her fingertips. March 14th, 1972, Dearest Ruth. Today I saw a boy's face again. Not a dream this time. It came while I was fixing the roof. Something about the light on the wood, the way it glinted just so. I remembered his eyes, that day in the village. He took the candy and smiled. That smile haunts me more than the silence that followed. Ava paused. She looked at Eli. His eyes fluttered beneath the lids, but he didn't wake. The ventilator hissed softly. Mechanical breath in place of his own. She turned another page. August 5th, 1986. Ava is 11 now. She laughs like her mother, but I see the same look in her eyes sometimes, the hunger to understand. She asked me once why I don't talk about Vietnam. I told her there's nothing worth repeating. That was a lie. I'm full of stories. But none of them end well. Her throat tightened. She didn't remember asking, but she believed him. She had always felt that space between them, a silence shaped like a war no one spoke of. She kept reading. October 2nd, 1991. I tried writing a letter to the VA again. Included more detail this time. Mentioned the spray, the residue, the village, the boy. I even gave the name Dewey. I don't know if that was his real name. He never told me. I needed him to have a name. They responded with a form letter. Your claim cannot be substantiated. That sentence could be my epitaph. Ava blinked hard. Dewey, a name wrapped in dust, a name she had never heard, a boy she would have never known. She looked back at her father. Tubes ran from his arms like roots threading into machines that kept him here. He had carried that name alone for decades. Why hadn't he told her? But the answer was in the letters. July 17th, 2003. I'm tired, not of life, just of carrying it alone. The weight, the guilt, the silence. Ava called yesterday. I told her everything was fine. She asked about my back pain. I said it was from the garden. Another lie. But how do I tell her that something is blooming under my skin? Something I buried long ago. The metaphor struck her like a stone. Something blooming, and now it had. She closed the notebook gently and placed it on the bedside table. Then she reached for his hand. It was still warm, still here. Late that night, after the nurses dimmed the lights and the machine softened to background, Eli stirred. His breath shifted beneath the mask. His fingers twitched. Ava leaned forward. Then his eyelids fluttered, opened. His eyes were slow to focus, but when they found her, they stayed. She smiled. "Hi, Dad," she whispered. His lips moved dry and slow. She held a straw to his mouth. He sipped, weak but willing. They sat in silence, together. After a while, his voice came, rough, gritty, but his. "I thought I was gone." "You almost were." His eyes drifted to the window, then back. "How long?" 2 days, she said. Maybe a lifetime. He closed his eyes again, not to sleep, but to breathe. Ava hesitated, then reached for the notebook. "I read them," she said softly. "The letters." He didn't move. "They're beautiful," she added, "and hard, and honest." Still no response. So she opened to a page and began to read aloud. Only a paragraph. Only once. When she finished, Eli turned his head toward her. "I didn't want you to see me like that," he rasped. "Like what?" "Weak. Broken." Ava shook her head. "You're not broken. You're brave." "No," he said. "I was a coward. I buried it all and hoped it would stay buried. But it didn't. No." There was a long pause. Then he said, barely audible, "I still see him. The boy. Sometimes in dreams. Sometimes in mirrors." "Dewey," she whispered. He nodded. "I gave him that name. I don't know why. Because he mattered," she said. "You needed him to be real." Eli's eyes welled. Not tears exactly, just a glisten like dew on rust. "I thought if I ignored it long enough it would stop hurting. Did it?" "No." Ava leaned forward and took his hand again. "You don't have to carry it anymore." He closed his eyes. One tear slid from the corner. Not dramatic, just quiet, just enough. She stayed beside him for hours, whispering things she hadn't meant to share. About the holidays he missed, the birthdays she spent waiting for a call, the letters she had written to him but never sent. They were more alike than she realized. Later that evening, before the nurses came to check the IV lines, Ava reached into the drawer and pulled out a folded photo she had printed at the hospital kiosk. It was from his military file, a scan she had requested while waiting during one of the tests. In the photo, a young Eli crouched beside a Vietnamese boy, handing him something, a piece of candy perhaps. The boy smiled, uncertain but grateful. A moment caught before the world fell apart. She placed the photo in his hand. He stared at it a long time. Then, with trembling fingers, he gestured toward the leather notebook. She opened it. He slid the photo into the final page, then closed the cover. A breath left him. Deep, heavy, but clean. For the first time the jungle receded, and in its place something else took root. Not silence, but peace. They left the hospital on a Thursday. The sky was clean and forgetful, a soft slate blue without memory of storms. Ava drove slowly, cautious of every turn. In the passenger seat, Eli stared out the window, silent. The cabin appeared over the rise like a long-lost thought. Its roof still sagged slightly on one end. The porch still leaned into the trees. And yet it felt new somehow, like a second chance wearing the skin of something old. Eli stepped out carefully, the cane steady beneath his hand. Each step was a negotiation between breath and gravity. Ava hovered close but didn't touch him. He needed to feel this return on his own. Inside, everything was as he'd left it. The armchair near the fire, the framed photo of Ava's mother on the mantel, the mug he used to hold like a shield against conversation. But it was the silence that surprised him most. It no longer pressed against the walls like an unwelcome guest. It no longer echoed with accusation. Instead, it wrapped the cabin gently like cotton over old wounds. Later that evening, after the fire had settled into embers and the day had curled into dusk, Ava handed him a small wooden box. No lock, no key, just polished oak, smooth and warm to the touch. "What's this?" he asked, though he already knew. She smiled. "A place to keep the things that matter." He opened it. Empty, but not hollow. Over the next few days the box began to fill. Slowly, deliberately. The first item he placed inside was a photo him and Ava taken the day before the surgery. His face pale, hers tense with unshed tears. But they were holding hands. That was what mattered. The second item was a rusted dog tag, not his own, but Noah Delaney's. He had kept it in a drawer for years, unsure why. Now he wiped it clean, wrapped it in cloth, and placed it in the box. Not as a burden, but as memory. The third was a dried sprig of rosemary, for remembrance. He had grown it out back for decades, never really understanding why it thrived in such poor soil. Now he knew. There were letters too, copies of the ones Ava had read to him. He had rewritten them with trembling hands, letting ink bleed what his voice could not. Each item was a chapter, each layer a reckoning. One afternoon, while sorting through old papers, Ava discovered a small envelope buried beneath a stack of unopened mail. It bore the seal of the Department of Veterans Affairs. She hesitated, then brought it to her father. He stared at the envelope for a long while, fingers tracing its edge. The paper yellowed slightly, as if time had tried to erase its weight. He opened it slowly. Inside was a letter, brief, official, acknowledgement of his prior claims, confirmation of Agent Orange exposure, and a paragraph that offered no apology but something that resembled it. "In light of evolving evidence and records declassified since your original filing, we recognize the legitimacy of your report dated October 2, 1991. We regret the delay in acknowledgement." He read it twice, then folded it, then placed it gently into the box, not as validation, but as closure. That night he sat on the porch, the box in his lap. The stars above seemed closer now, less cold. He opened the lid one last time and placed one final object inside a single piece of candy wrapped in crinkled foil. The kind he used to carry in his pocket in Long On, the kind he once gave to a boy with wide eyes and dust on his cheeks. He didn't need to say the name. It was already written, in every item, in every silence, in every breath that no longer hurt to take. Stillwater wasn't marked on most maps. It existed like a breath between sentences, a place not lost, but quietly waiting. A former monastery turned sanctuary, it sat nestled in a hollow of pine and wild grass. No gates, no marble sign, just a carved wooden arch at the entrance bearing a single word, "Stay." Eli arrived with little more than the clothes on his back, a notebook in his coat pocket and the wooden box held like a relic across his lap. Ava stood beside him, her hand on his elbow, her smile both anxious and proud. Inside the rooms were simple, clean beds, tall windows, books on every shelf. The air smelled of cedar and memory. But it was the people who made Stillwater sacred. Men with canes, women in wheelchairs, eyes weathered by war, poverty, loss, each of them carrying something invisible. Some smiled. Some nodded. Most simply looked and saw him, and Eli saw them, not as strangers, but as survivors. On his first morning, he wandered the gardens. A narrow path wound between stone markers and late summer asters. Wind chimes danced in the breeze, their song high and sad like a lullaby for ghosts. He sat on a bench beneath a sycamore and opened his notebook, not to write, just to hold it. It felt warm against his palm. Later, he attended a community circle, 8 chairs in a sunroom, no script, no therapist, just silence and courage. When it came his turn to speak, he didn't. Not the first time, or the second. But on the third, he cleared his throat and said only one thing. There was a boy. I gave him candy. He died. No one asked for more. No one needed to. After the circle, a woman with silver hair pressed a smooth river stone into his hand. It bore a single word, carved deep, begin. He kept it in his pocket for weeks. Stillwater moved slowly, like healing, like grief that stopped needing permission. Eli spent his mornings tending to the herb beds, pulling weeds with careful fingers. The earth was soft here, forgiving. It reminded him of the riverbanks in Long On before the mist came, before silence bloomed. In the afternoons, he sat in the library and read to those who could no longer see. Poetry mostly, and sometimes, only sometimes, his own letters. At night, he would return to his room and open the box. He never removed anything. He just looked, touched, remembered. One evening, he found a slip of paper folded between the letters. Ava must have placed it there. A note in her handwriting. You gave me a father I never knew I missed. I won't let your silence be your legacy. He didn't cry, not because he wasn't moved, but because some emotions settle so deep they become stillness. Weeks passed, then months. Seasons turned. One morning, Ava visited with coffee and stories from her life outside. She talked about a teaching job she was considering, a memoir she was slowly sketching. He listened, and when she paused, he handed her the notebook. I want you to finish it, he said. She blinked. He shook his head. It's time. That afternoon, he began packing. Not everything, just a few shirts, a framed photo, the notebook now in Ava's hands, and the box. Always the box. He wasn't going far, just down the hill to the smaller house they kept for residents who stayed longer than most. A quiet wing, more trees, fewer footsteps. It was called the Grove. Ava helped him arrange the space. 1 chair, 1 table, 1 small shelf for letters. Before she left, she kissed his forehead and whispered, You're not finished yet. He smiled. Neither are you. Weeks later, on a Thursday morning, much like the one that brought him here, Eli hosted his first storytelling circle. There were no lights, no camera, no applause, just 6 people in a half circle and a candle flickering in the center. He didn't read. He remembered. He spoke of the jungle, of Noah, of Dewey, of candy and war and silence, of how pain can root itself so deep you forget it's there, and how healing isn't the absence of pain, but the willingness to feel it without fear. When he finished, no one clapped, but someone reached for his hand. That was enough. Stillwater thrived. It welcomed veterans, runaways, caretakers, anyone with a story too heavy to carry alone. And in the corner of one quiet room beneath the window, where light pooled like grace, there sat a box. Unlocked, unhidden, always open.